mean, I spell it out before you get it, baby. Show me your soul. And honey, I'll show you mine. I'll show you mine. Boy, I'm standing right here holding up a sign, shamelessly displaying my state of mind. But you walk right past me, pretending like you don't see what's yours for the taking tonight. Ooh, show me your soul. Baby, I'll show you mine. Show me your soul. Can't you see it's way past time? How explicit do I have to be? You mean I spell it out before you get it, baby? Show me your soul. And honey, I'll show you mine.
Well, hello. Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to today's program. I'm Lauren Michaels Harris, the host of Bathrobe Moments. And we are so excited and honored to have you all here, as well as the wonderful panel that we have for you today. On behalf of the E360 Television Network, I just want to say how proud we are that there are people in our world who care about these things like we're speaking of today. So I just wanted to give you a little backstory about why this is so passionate for myself. I lived through 22 foster homes, starting in the mid-70s until I aged out at the age of 18. A lot of the things that you'll hear today, as far as the topic, the unconscious bias and the disproportionality in the foster care system, I can attest firsthand that it is in fact still around. I am a product of it. I believe today, on the other side of that experience, that it was pretty much a feeder school, if you will, for a lot of the places that you will hear about. And so there has been a lot of change over the last 4 decades, but there is still room for more. And that's why we're here today. So I just wanted to say again, on behalf of our 60 plus show hosts who deliver well over 200 hours of amazing content each and every week, informative as well as thought-provoking. And we wanted to say thank you for making it possible. I wanted to thank Aaron Hymas and Aggie Corbin, the founders of E360 Television, as well as our executive producers, Joshua T. Berglund, and myself, Lauren Michaels Harris, and finally, but not last, our associate producer, Daniel Echeverria. From the entire team here to you, we thank you and we welcome you into our home, and we hope that you leave here today inspired, uplifted, and even better informed than you were when you came. So without further ado, I want to get started right now. Get back, sit down, share this broadcast out. Don't keep all of this greatness to yourself. Be of service to others and get it out there, and together we can make change. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're all touched by foster care, because we all have, in my opinion, some level of trauma, some level of something.
Disproportionality is the term used to describe when there are basically too many children and families of color in the system with respect.
At 7 or 8, but in a minute he'll be 17, and then he's a threat to you.
Because we all have, in my opinion, some level of trauma, some level of something, some kind of way, or we've seen it, at least.
Hi, everyone. I am Natalie Chavis Fisher, and I am so excited to be your host today for this very, very special foster care presentation. unbiased, unconscious bias and disproportionality in foster care. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about how we came to this. When E360 TV came to me and asked me to put together a 2-part special, I was elated. And I said, you know what, the very first topic, and they agreed, needs to be disproportionality, because it affects not only children in the foster care system, but certainly our society at large. I myself am a 3rd-generation attorney. My grandfather was the first African-American judge to be elected in the state of Indiana. As a child, I watched my father defend Black youth, against police brutality. Recently I thought of a case back in 1987 where a local boy, Michael Taylor, was shot in the head, gunpoint range, while he was handcuffed in the backseat of a police car. He was picked up for an alleged theft. We still don't know if he stole what was alleged or not. But nevertheless, the city was in uproar. The police officer said, he took a gun while he was handcuffed with his hands behind his back. He took a gun from his sock, and we didn't catch the gun. We didn't know about the gun, even though we searched him. And that's how he killed himself. Unfortunately, those police officers, much like in many cases today, were never brought to justice. No criminal charges were even filed. And as a community, we've gone through this time after time. We've heard stories after stories. So I watched my father actually be able to help give the family a civil settlement, which still doesn't bring your child back. But my mother grew up in the segregated South. And so she always imparted upon myself and my brother to make sure that you are not only treated equally, but that you lend a hand so that other people have access to education, access to housing, access to healthcare, and you name it. In addition to that, my mother's mother informally fostered many children throughout my mother's childhood. And my aunt, my mother's sister, ended up becoming a licensed foster care parent. And so I grew up with tons of foster care cousins, tons of foster cousins who I really didn't know weren't my biological cousins. And then lastly, I was named after a little boy named Nathaniel Williams, who my father's family actually fostered the majority of Nathaniel's life. So when you look at all these things kind of coming together and marrying, I understand why it's important today, why this is God's work, at least for me, and why I want to be an advocate. So when I thought about this special, I just thought about history. I thought about the transatlantic slave trade, all the way to the Civil War, to the Civil Rights Movement, to police brutality, to disproportionality in education, healthcare, land ownership, you name it. It helped me understand that this system has been built for a long time, brick upon brick upon brick. So it's a hard system to tackle all at once, but I am convinced as we have these critical conversations, we can help break down some of those, chisel down, brick at a time, some of those walls. And it takes a collective effort. It takes all of us to be able to do this. It's important work for those of the majority race and those like me of the minority race. And so I'm bringing some very, very expert guests who are here to talk about different aspects of this disproportionate system. And so at this point, I'd like to bring my first guest. So the Smith family, Micah and Jamal, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I am so happy to see you guys. I know that you went through hell and water and back to make sure you guys were here. You've got those kiddos, and I know you were going different directions, and this shows your commitment. I've got a chill because I wasn't sure who this first guest was going to be. So thank you so much for being here.
We made it. We made it. We wouldn't miss it. We definitely tried our best and made some things happen, moved some chess pieces around, and we're here.
Absolutely. And you're here. And absolutely. And I want to get straight to you because you guys know what to do with a platform. The first question, Micah and Jamal, I want to ask you. I remember you told a story in the foster care docuseries, Foster Care Perfect Imperfection, about a time where the two of you were evaluated to be able to adopt a young Black boy. And there were some interesting issues that took place. Can you guys describe that story or elaborate?
Yeah, so that was actually we got an echo. Sound check good? We good?
Yeah, it's good. It's
okay.
Good.
Yeah, so that was the first attempt. So we collectively, Mike and I prayed and knew what we wanted to do. by way of adoption and kind of walking through the process for the first time. No one we knew personally had ever done it, right? And so we got to the point where we were identified as a potential home for a young man, and we drove to St. Louis.
Yeah, it was St. Louis.
St. Louis, and went through the interview process. A few things stood out. First is the folks conducting the interview around the table were all white women, which in the beginning didn't necessarily raise the red flag, but my spidey senses, as I call them, started to tingle a little bit. And you're going, this group of folks, probably well-intended, obviously, are making the collective decision about the best space and place for this young Black boy to be. And I don't think the alarm started to go off until the line of questioning started to happen, right? And the questioning was, how do you handle, discipline? How do you, what's the culture of your home? How do you handle these types of scenarios and the like? And we were candid and honest about one, the way that our home functions. We already had 2 children, and
one of which, if I may interrupt, one of which was an African-American boy.
So we already had our oldest son, and he was 6 at the time.
He was 6 at the time. So yeah, we're a Black couple. All of our kids are Black. We're Black. Our families are Black. Everything about us is about as pro-Black as you're gonna get. Right. And we eat, sleep, and breathe the culture. Like we know what it is. I personally come from I come from the element, right? And raised in a space where my grandmother, I've got cousins and aunts and uncles who I didn't realize weren't blood until I was much older. Wow. Because we informally adopted. It was just the love and the culture. So, that wasn't, unfamiliar to me. And so some of the questions, well, let me rephrase that. Some of the answers we gave to the questions they asked obviously didn't meet their criteria.
So what's an example? Can you think of an example?
How would you how would you discipline one was, and they didn't say discipline. So basically they gave a scenario where this child would refuse to leave the house or refuse to put clothes on because they just didn't want to. So they asked us, so what would you do in a situation if this child didn't want to leave and you guys were going on a family trip, to the zoo, and he didn't want to go? And so Jamal and I kind of took a beat because we were like, is this a real question? Is this a real question?
This happened in my family.
He's a child.
He's a kid. Like, he's 5. Like, I don't really understand what you're wanting us to say, but this is how we would respond. And
yeah, I mean, barring from
I think you said something like he would go.
Yeah.
We still would go.
As the 5-year-old, he doesn't have an option to dictate how we flow. Now,
and I think you said that too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, barring him being sick or ill and incapable of moving or going. But if he's just having a temper tantrum because he doesn't want to go, that's not an option. And the culture of our home is very loving. We love, we hug, we kiss. But our children are children, and they remain in a child's place. He would be joining our home, not the versus. And so, the culture of our home, which we feel is not only loving, but very conducive to productive upbringing for kids. And the proof was in the pudding for us. We had a child already who was a young Black boy, obviously, who was a year older than him. He was not just about, he's thriving. He still is thriving. He's doing amazing. And so, in our mind's eye, we're going, look, our recipe works for what it's worth. And not only that, we relate. Now, mind you, even at the end of it, when we, as we were leaving, we noticed and we kind of got wind that the other couple being, considered was a white couple. So I think
Jamal,
that.
Let me pause there. I want you to tell us the outcome in the next segment. So we're going to kind of leave our listeners kind of hanging. Okay. Because I want you to be able to describe what you noticed in that room when you had that particular response about, he'd be going. Okay. That's how we need to know that. Then we need to know the outcome. So we whet the appetite. And so I'm going to bring you back in that next segment to answer just that question.
So just talking about their reaction, I mean, they were taken aback, right? They were.
Well, don't let us know yet. We're going to bring on the next guest, and when we bring you back, we're going to have you elaborate. So thank you very. All right, thank you very much. So now up is Judge Geoffrey Gaither. Hello, Judge Gaither. How are you?
I'm doing well. Nat, you know what? Micah and Jamal, they are my new favorite couple. Oh man, I can't believe you let us hanging like that. Like, oh man, now I got to stay the whole time. I was going to cut and run.
And listen here, I've heard the story. They could take the entire 90 minutes and have us laughing, have us crying, have us happy, have us mad on just that story alone.
I believe that. Those are real people right there. Oh man, that was must see TV. That's what that was.
That's what that was.
Must see TV.
That was must see. And speaking of must see, every day in your courtroom is must see. I used to be in your courtroom, so I do know this.
Listen, it is on and popping every day. Every day.
Yes, so let me just ask you this. And so we're just going to take a few minutes and then we're going to bring you back as well. Just briefly, from what you see in your courtroom, in your research, in other courtrooms across the nation, because you're in committees across the nation. You've been a judge, certainly within the judicial system since 1995. What exactly is disproportionality?
Disproportionality is when there are too many youth and families of color with respect to the total population that are in the system. For example, if Black people are 10% of the population, but make up of 60% of the criminal justice system, or 50% of the health system that needs care, or 40% of the youth justice system or child welfare. And this disproportionate problem exists in every institution, in every jurisdiction in the country. It's not a unique phenomenon. It's been existing for quite some time now.
So what about unconscious bias? How does that play into child welfare?
Well, it's the same as in every other institution. It's institutional bias, implicit bias. I mean, it could be well-meaning folk but still have a racist decision because it's an institutional issue. Because people create the policies that dictate how the system is going to work. And so even if you don't intend to, you can have a racist outcome. And I'll tell you very quickly, how it works. Let's say you got two kids, one Black, one white, and it's 12 o'clock at night. The police officer stops them and they're smoking marijuana. Okay. Yeah. The police officer decides to give them a break by taking the kids home. But at the white kid's home, parents are home. Okay, no problem. But there's nobody home at the Black kid. So he takes the kid to the juvenile center for processing. You fast forward 6 months, officer gets the same kids. This time he decides to arrest them. Okay, Black kid has a history in the system. White kid does not. Black kid gets treated differently because, you've been here before. And so for non-racist reason, somehow the Black kid gets impacted differently. Now I know that's very simplistic and you'll get a lot of people, hey, that didn't work that way. But I was just trying to very generalize how a non-race based decision will have race-based outcome.
And that makes sense, Judge Gaither. And it does work that way. We're living proof. You're living proof. You've seen it day after day after day. So I want to talk with you more in the next segment. So thank you very much for letting me
All right.
Judge Gaither.
Hold
on. All right. Okay. Next up, we're going to have Maureen Flately. Hello, Maureen. How are you?
Hey, Natalie. And by the way, I want to be Judge Gaither's best friend because he is hilarious.
He's funny.
So we can put that all together, right?
Right. That's right. You put the whole team together and we could just do a show, you know?
Can you imagine? Yeah.
No. Everyone would be in absolute stitches, let me tell you. Yeah. Listen, I am so impressed with your legislative work. I mean, you've got this new Home Study Act that you are advocating for, and I understand. So can you tell us just a little bit about that act and if there's any room within the act for sort of cultural sensitivity?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I've been involved with a lot of the large scale work that Congress has done to regulate this issue, to improve child welfare, to improve outcomes, to train judges. But the one area that continued to nag at us was this process of the home study. And as we just heard with your original guest, the Smiths, this is a flashpoint in a lot of different ways. And so the first thing you have to understand is that, first of all, everybody has biases of their own. So if you're wearing an orange shirt and I don't like orange, that could be sending a signal. But far more seriously, to Judge Gaither's point, this is a system that is sort of built to work against kids in some ways. So when we think about home studies, we think of adoption as considered a state law issue, which is really kind of ridiculous because dating back to the orphan trains, it's been fundamentally interstate activity. But what that meant was that every state had their own home study standards, and some states had different standards for different kinds of adoption. So
isn't it true that the different standards can lend itself? I mean, that in and of itself can lend itself to bias and disproportionate treatment.
100%. So I started looking at what this really meant in the lives of kids. So for instance, 20 years ago, I was on the board of DC's Child Welfare Agency. We had 3,000 kids in the system. They were all African-American. We had about 1,200 kids who were backed up in the system, were legally free for adoption, or were going to be, but nobody was doing anything with them. So we looked case by case and realized that about 75% of these cases needed home studies.
Wow.
And that was sort of both the passport to kids moving forward, but the barrier to them moving forward. So it quickly became apparent that different home study standards, coupled with a lack of training of workers, coupled with the inherent biases that many of us have as human beings, is really working against kids. Wow. So a number of years ago, the state of California, in an effort to have more consistent home studies from county to county, they're a county-based system, took about 15 years, looked at academic research, looked at their own performance, and they developed this methodology to do home studies. So the thing that makes this methodology different, and I think better, is that you're not just relying on how the practitioner who's doing the home study feels or what they think. You're following a framework that also requires you to depend on this research to get outside evidence for some possible problems or barriers. And of course, I think that we've progressed pretty far from the 20 or so years ago when this was originally created. But at the end of the day, and I think the Smiths case really illustrates this. Bias exhibits itself in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
And that discipline question comes up over and over and over again. And so we really felt that it was time, after we've done some pretty big reform of the system, to just take this on. Because kids, if you have a home study from Mississippi and the child's going to New York, those two states may not agree in terms of the priorities of their home study policies.
Well, I tell you, Maureen, I love that. And I want to hear more on the other side of the break. I just got a note from our executive producer that we're going to end your teaser here. And then we're going to bring you back in the next segment and we can delve in more. So thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. And so we will talk more after the break. This is E360 TV, and we'll be back with you in a moment.
You talk about the children, 500,000 children. When you hear that number, that is astronomical. Yes. And it kind of hurts to know that there are children out there who want to be loved and want to be taken care of.
That's right. And should be loved.
And should be loved. And should be taken care of. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And just think about the ones that aren't in the system that we don't know about. That's why I say we are all touched by foster care. Yeah. Because we all have, in my opinion, some level of trauma, some level of something, some kind of way, or we've seen it, at least. So just think about the children that are outside of the numbers.
Yeah, talk about a family and or children who you have placed in a home who have really touched your heart. I know they all have. I know all of them have, obviously, because, we love children and we want to see them happy and in loving relationships with parents and with people who love them and will give them the care that they deserve.
That's right.
But talk about, I think there was a case you told me about, 2 little girls that you were able to put into foster care and they eventually were adopted, correct?
Yes. I think I know the one you're talking about. So those 2 little girls were just beautiful beautiful, beautiful little girls. They were adopted by someone who did not know them, which I think is wonderful. Just someone who wanted to love on them. The children were placed in a foster mother's home. She's a single mother, and she decided that she wants to provide for these children. And to date, they are flourishing. They're on honor roll. They're in every activity imaginable. They've got piano lessons, I mean, swimming lessons.
Particular, they need protection. A child that we consider vulnerable is a child where some of those protective factors have been pulled away for whatever reason.
We want to prevent these children from going deeper into the system.
What people need to understand is these kids just need a chance.
Welcome back. I'm Natalie Chavis Fisher, and I'm your host today for this very, very important subject, unconscious bias and disproportionality in foster care. The clips we just looked at, shows what can happen when foster care is right, what can happen when the system actually heals. But what we're talking about today is when the system may do further damage, right? Because it's unfortunately is comprised of some unconscious bias and disproportionality. So in that vein, I want to bring back our first guests, Micah and Jamal Smith. Micah and Jamal, welcome back. Well, you whet the appetite of all of us. You got the Judge Gaither excited, and certainly Maureen Flately excited. So we have to know, you told a story about being evaluated to adopt an African-American boy. You were asked a discipline question. So take us back through that, pick up where you left off. What was you guys' opinion? And then certainly what was the outcome?
Well, I'll start by saying just that entire interview was nerve-wracking, right? So we drive 5 hours to St. Louis, and then we're getting asked questions that we would probably have thought, I don't think we knew what to expect. We didn't expect the normal everyday type of a question. So to be quite honest, the way that we answered them was with all honesty and how we kind of run our household. The responses that we were getting we got a lot of head nods. We got a lot of pen to paper. And I don't think we really knew kind of what that meant, but there weren't a lot of, that's, encouraging follow-ups, but there were follow-up questions to everything that we said. So
yeah, you could tell that. So for example, with the discipline question in particular, and we kind of had more of a matter-of-fact response to it. It was, for us, honestly, even thinking back to it, the question didn't make sense, right? It was, if a child doesn't want to go somewhere the family is scheduled to go, like, what do you do? Like, and I'm thinking, I'm not really sure how, like, is there another response for we're leaving? I mean, we want to make sure he's good to go. Again, assuming he's not like hurt or really sick and just can't go, but just having a temper tantrum. And that happens, right? When even our children now, as they've gotten older, they're playing the video game and it's time to go. And they, I don't want to go. Well, you don't have an option. We got 5 minutes, beat me to the car so we can go. We're done, right? Right. So they, so they had some follow-up responses about, they would say stuff like, well, some of the children might have some emotional issues, and you want to sit and ask them why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, and and make sure that they're emotionally ready to go. And it's funny, and then
this is so funny.
And so we
corrected your parenting style.
And so and we're going, look, unless you're telling me the child, and when you go through the adoption process, you list the things that you're not willing to deal with. So we knew that severe mental and severe physical disabilities were something that we weren't equipped to handle. So we assumed that the child, based off of the information that we provided and that matched up with us and the child, that he was not suffering from any severe mental disability, right? We are under that impression because that's what we listed, and you took what we listed and paired us up with this young man. So if that's the assumption that he has no severe mental health issues, then he has normal emotions, like I just don't want to go, or I'm tired, or you made me mad, which are all healthy, and he or she would be well within their right to feel that way, but we're still leaving.
Right.
Beat me to the car so we can go. Right. So they would say, well, you know, and sitting down, especially if the family is scheduled, and all this is going through our mind. We talked about it. If the family is scheduled to go, we got somewhere to be. I'm not going to park because you don't feel like going and have this long, drawn out conversation about emotion.
I was probably kicking him.
She was kicking him because my face must have said a whole lot. You know?
I was like, don't mess this up for us, because I kind of got a sense that was not where they wanted us to go, because they kept throwing even more severe situations at us. Well, they would say, well, what if he has this? What if he has sensory issues? What if he doesn't like the texture of his clothes and different things? And so then we kind of got back and said, okay, we evaluated this afterwards, but we were like, okay, so are you saying that the child that we're being evaluated for now has all these other things?
Right.
And so what is it? Because we weren't aware of that. What's really going on? So it really kind of felt like they were withholding information. We were being honest, yet they didn't like.
Or they were being biased.
Or they were being, and we just didn't really know at the time.
Either we didn't have all the information, because look, if the child in consideration has some severe sensory issues, and that would play into, you know, him not wanting to leave in that scenario of a question, then of course our response would cater to that. That type of information wasn't privy or given to us, and so we're under the impression, again, because we listed, we don't, you know, we're not equipped for anything, you know, any severe mental or physical, that, you know, he's a child with some trauma and some other things by way of, you know, by nature of what he's been through. But apart from that, he's good to go. He needs some structure, he needs some love, right? And he needs some direction, and we're going to give it to him, and we moving. But if your question is, the family is getting ready to roll and the 5-year-old says he's not, then I just don't know how else to respond.
Separating the family, mom going here and us canceling the trip is just not an option at that point.
I think you make a great point, you know, but for an extreme situation that you never told us, given this fact pattern that we believe we were entering into, these are our answers. And I know there are more questions like that. Can you tell the listeners what the outcome was? Were you selected to adopt this young boy who was the same age as your child?
We were not. And I was devastated.
Yeah, she was. It really hurt me because I took it personal. Like,
devastated.
My response, I should have gave we're going to change our plans conversation and then schedule the day to have some discussions about, you know, his emotional well-being and all these things, which honestly, and then I go, but I can't do that because that's not honest.
That's not honest, and it's not cultural. It's not honest to the culture, if you will. The way that we parent and the way that we love our kids and the way that we love on our kids and other kids, that just wasn't honest for us.
And not only that, what they did not know is at the time, Jamal, I think you were the executive director of the Civil Liberties Union, and you were well equipped with research, right? And you were well equipped with knowledge about unconscious bias and conscious bias and things of that nature. And if your antennas went up, it's just not an average antenna. It's not a chip on the shoulder antenna. It's an educated antenna. So that brings me to my next question. I remember in the docuseries, Jamal and Micah, and Jamal, you in particular, you talked about the fact that when a child is 5, he's cute, but when he's 15, he's a threat. And so it's, you know, and so you have some advocacy centered around that. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. And we've seen a lot of it really kind of manifesting itself in the last year or so, you know, and as so let me rewind too, Natalie. So it was a white couple, we believe, that received this child, and God bless them, right, wanting to be in, but there's a cultural component, kind of now circling back to your question, you know, with all of our children, we're really conscious about releasing them into the world, and not just for what the normal parent would think about, you know, make sure they're responsible for these things. As parents of young Black kids, in particular young Black boys, we have to make sure that they are mentally, socially, and physically equipped to handle the bias and racist moments that are inevitably going to hit them, right? And so it's not okay to you know, for the authority structure to bend to the, our children need to understand, right, the time and the place and how you move. So even though we're in tune and want to make sure that we're connected to how our children are feeling, what's causing them to feel that way, we also need to make sure that they understand that making an emotional decision is not in your best interest, right? And they need to understand that at 5, to your point, because at 15, let's say 16, when my son is driving, and he gets pulled over, Like I need him to be able to handle his emotion in that moment, because his ability to handle that emotion could literally be the difference between him making it home and us having to go pick him out in the morgue. And that's not, and so that's a non-negotiable for us. We don't have, unfortunately, our children don't have that leeway, right? They have to at least emotionally grow up a little bit faster than others. And as unfortunate as that may seem, we don't have the option to sit back and rest and assume or hope that the world is going to treat them differently than it has treated them for the last 400 plus years.
And that's so important to me. When you said when he gets pulled over, you didn't say, and I can't think of an African American who would say if he gets pulled over. We know it's a when he gets pulled over. So that brings me to my next question. How important is it in the foster care system to have African Americans or just people of color as foster parents, mentors, and the like? Micah, can you answer that question?
So you said how common was it? You kind of cut out.
Oh, how important is it? How important is it for a foster child of color?
Absolutely. So it's extremely important. So much so that one of the reasons, outside of us wanting to personally adopt, we've always advocated to our close friendship circle that they should look into fostering and adoption, because there aren't as many couples that are doing it, especially with our own African American children. We do it so informally, if you will. We'll take on cousins, aunties' kids, nieces and nephews, neighbors' kids, and things like that. But they're kids, but to actually go into the system and go through the process of the home study, that's not really common that we do, unless there's some reason why you can't have children. We'll adopt at that point. I've got aunts that have adopted from birth, in those traditional sense of ways, but from the whole foster care system, that's not something that a lot of us do. And it's extremely important, because when you match up those children with people that look like them, I don't really have the data, but I have a gut feeling that they probably fare better because of what's going on in the world today. Just culturally, they can identify, they can communicate better, and representation matters. So, when you don't have, and you've been ripped away from your home base, your parents, you don't know who they are, and you're matched with someone that at least can identify with you, I can almost say that, that would fare better for that child versus I've already been ripped away. I've already got all these things going on, trauma that I have to deal with, plus social issues. If you're in middle school is very cruel. So I'm already going into situations just as a normal child with all the normal kid things. On top of that, I don't have my parents. On top of that, the parents I do have don't look like me. And so how can they identify? How can they relate? And yes, there's love there, and that is really awesome. Love is an amazing thing, but identity and knowing who you are and where you are and being able to relate to people that you live with is so much more important and imperative for those children as they're growing up, especially in those middle ages where they're trying to find themselves. And so we definitely advocate for that, very much so.
Very good. And I tell you, Micah and Jamal, it is known that children of color remain in the system longer. And part of it is we're disproportionately there. That's part of it, right? And then we're in the system longer. There's sort of this stigma against, certainly, adopting sort of a Black child. And they have some of the most sort of destructive experiences in the system. And I want to talk to you guys about that more when we bring you back for the panel. But I'm going to bring in Judge Gaither to talk a little bit more about disproportionality. So thank you so much. Hi, Judge Gaither. Welcome back.
Oh, Nat, I'm so bummed that the Smiths were not successful. And I was saying, okay, that's a very curious decision because, look, I've been doing this for a while, and it does not take a long period of time to make a judgment about someone's character.
Right.
And unless there's something I don't know, there always is. I'm just talking about on the surface of it. I don't know why that the Smiths aren't top shelf, triple A plus worthy.
I tell you, they are top shelf, and ultimately they did adopt 2 children,
okay.
who are 2 African-American children who are flourishing in their home. And sometimes you wonder if you have an experience so that you can then be a voice for that experience, because they're willing to go to any platform and advocate, for these issues. And, I can attest firsthand, all their children are doing superb in the home. But let's pick up kind of where they left off. I mean, sort of this disproportionality and sort of these, children of color having a different experience in the system. And in the intro, Lauren Michaels Harris talked about his own experience. So I just want to ask you, first of all, why, let's talk more about the disproportionality. Certainly, why are children of color treated differently in the child welfare system?
Wow. I mean, all of it cannot be blamed on poverty. Black people and families and children of color are disproportionately living at or below the poverty line. And those are the families that are traditionally get caught up in child welfare. And so what happens, even when that happens, those children have the worst outcomes. It's longer to place, longer to reunification. They tend to get placed in more placements, fewer family placements, fewer kinship placements, and especially when we're talking about Black people, because of the over-policing that has taken place in our community over the years. Well, most child welfare agencies have a rule against placing children with families with felonies. And so, Black people have a disproportionate amount of felonies.
That's good.
In their records. And so it makes it difficult to place children with their own relatives, because often, when a family has felonies, then generally the extended families have felonies. And so we're always hard pressed to find waivers and whatnot. And I've been known to order the children placed there anyway.
Well, and not every judge does that. And to your point, I cannot countless clients who were not able to ultimately adopt because they have a criminal history. But we're talking about the fact that the criminal histories exist, oftentimes are disproportionate. So Judge Gaither, why should anybody care?
Oh, are you kidding me? We've seen these beautiful pictures of these babies in the clips just today. And don't get me to singing because I can't sing. But
Whitney Houston.
Well, Whitney Houston talk about teach the children, let them find the way, let them lead the way, and all of that. They not to be corny, but they really are our future.
Sure.
And and it really does take a village. And we really should care, because they will be our future leaders, whether you like it or not. And so, we love our babies. We love our families. We must love our future.
That's right. So what can be done about, well, first of all, tell us about this Undoing Racism workshop that you used to be a part of.
Yeah, well, about 10 years ago, we noticed that we had a huge disproportionality problem in our child welfare system and in our youth justice system, with too many Black kids in the detention center. So we looked around and we discovered this agency, or this organization out of Louisiana, New Orleans, as a matter of fact, called the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And they host and facilitate Undoing Racism discussions. And it was fantastic. We brought them up and we start having these workshops. And basically, you get about 35 to 40 people, male, female, Black and white, all race and so forth, and genders. And you sit around in a circle, 1960 style. And we talked about white privilege, institutional racism, implicit bias, and collaterally related issues of white supremacy and all of that, how it came to be, what is not. And let me tell you, those conversations were explosive. And I learned a lot, because I used to think that I was an expert on being a Black male, but I was amazed at what I did not know. And so we have hosted these conversations about once every 3 or 4 months since about 2010.
At some point they mandated for every child care worker and every firefighter, You know, I just want to say this. The state of Texas, I just did some research, it reportedly decreased their disparity by hosting these workshops, these undoing racism workshops, right? Doing cultural competency trainings and having community awareness initiatives. So something can be done. You know, we don't just have to talk about a problem. What are other things that can be done?
Well, you know, I put in the chat earlier. I mean, you can't get rid of a problem until you first properly identify the problem. And I'm just think how far we come as a nation, because there was a period of time we would not even be able to talk about it. You know, we'd have to whisper it, you know, or only at our dinner tables. But, you know, now here we are on using this technology, talking about white supremacy and all these related issues. And so
it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable conversations.
For some, you know, I'm down with it now. There was a time I'm like, but no, we gonna talk about this.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
We'll talk about how you dog my family. You know?
That's right. That's right. And we do talk about it at our dinner tables. All of us do. All of us do. But go ahead.
And so the problem is deeply rooted within institutions. You know, it's you know, and we have to disavow ourselves as the racists, as some people smoking cigars in a back room. And it doesn't really work that way, because if you go to primarily black cities, Cleveland, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and the like, and you'll still see racist, let's put that in quote, racist outcomes within their institutions. And we have black people, you know, black fire chiefs, black mayors, black prosecutors, black judges, and whatnot. Yet, you know, still disproportionality exists, because so it's not a purposeful and not an intentional thing. And that's why it makes it so insidious. That's why it's in part so difficult to uproot, because it's an institutional thing. It's a thought, and it's not an evil purpose or evil person. And so digging deep into the institutional policies, and we are creating and developing racial impact assessments and looking at, we call them racial equity lens. So you look at the policies and see, is the result of a policy some unintended consequence? And one of those is like placing families, but you can't place a child with a family if they have a felony conviction and things like that. Well, you know, that certainly looks good on paper, and we can all feel good because it's intended. But when you put it into practice, it disproportionately affects black people. So now we have to go to a deeper level. How can we preserve the family unit by placing children with family and family-like, but have some sensitivity to the prior criminal history? So, you know, you develop a waiver process, but even then, sometimes it becomes a problem. So, you know, the tentacles of an institution run deep, because often the institution in and of itself was not designed for or about or intended for or about black people, because
nor was the foster care system. The foster care system was originally started in England, and with indentured servitude, and it kind of came here, and then we kind of fell into it. You know, what about legislation? I mean, what can help these kids? Is there some legislation? You know, we've already talked a little bit about the Home Care Act and taking some objective measures. And what other types of legislation? Because there's something we can, in my opinion, there's something we can all out here do. So we got to get in where we fit in. I just want to share this before I let you answer this question. Yeah. A story that my pastor told a long time ago. I'm sure it was not an original story, but there were all these starfish that were put on the sand in the beach, right? And a little girl was walking with her father, and she would take one and throw it in the water. Then she'd take another one. The father said, "That's not good, right? That's not going to make a difference to all these hundreds of starfish." She picked up to another one and said, "It made a difference to that one." Right? So how do we make a difference to that one? Yes, it's an enormous system, but yes, we can chip away. We can have these conversations. You know, how can we do it, whether it be legislation or not? I mean, how can we help this problem?
Well, everybody has to pitch in. Everybody has to help, and it is not going to go away by itself. You know, it is said that the same people who created the problem can't be the ones who solve the problem. So it's I hate to use the term holistic, but it's a holistic problem. And we really have to step away and look at what is the original purpose of whatever the institution is. What are the policies that keep it going? And you have to slow walk it down. I mean, just like an octopus, you have to pull each tentacle out and say, why are we doing this? And look at it. And this is the impact. Is there another way to achieve the goal without impacting or disproportionately impacting children and families of color? Texas has shown itself to be a leader in that way. But here in Indiana, we ain't sitting around, shooting hoops, all the time. We get some things done. We have a disproportionality committee. We have a thing called JDAI, Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiatives, who works hand in hand with our disproportionate committee statewide. So statewide, county by county, we're slow walking this thing down. I mean, it took how many years to get to this point? I mean, hopefully it won't take that many years to get forward, but it starts with conversation. It's having a conversation, having courageous conversations with institutions, with children, with families, and with all institutions. I mean, you can't solve one thing without impacting something else. So we have to bring in schools. We have to bring in the faith-based community. We have to make sure our workforce and housing and all this, and we all have to do this collectively. So we here in Indianapolis, we have a number of multidisciplinary committees and subcommittees, each of us working on a variety of topics and each of us reporting to the other because we're trying to make systemic change. It's hard work. It's difficult work, but it's necessary work. And you know what? In the end, it's fun because we're making some gains.
We are, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I like how you gave those examples. Exactly. Indiana is no slouch. Texas has kind of come out here and they're sort of the leader in that, but we need more states, right? And so we need each one of us to go and advocate in the community with our legislation, with our governmental entities, our judicial systems for just this kind of work. And it's important to have these, certain conversations. So
And Natalie, props to you for sharing the word. I mean, I don't know if I can quite say you are a prophet, but I'm just going to say, props to you. Thank you for what you're doing because that helps. If whatever medium by any means necessary to bring this important issue to the attention of others, it's all good. It's all for the good. So
it's all for the good.
Thank you for what you do. Yes, ma'am.
Man, all things work together for good. Well, thank you for that. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and bring Maureen Flately back up, and then we're going to bring all our guests back up for a panel discussion. So thank you, Judge.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Hello, Maureen. Welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. Great.
Great. Have you had
it's like a vitamin. It's like taking a vitamin pill. Listen to that man.
Yeah, it is. And he's got a wealth of knowledge and experience. So everything he says he can back up with either data, research, or experience. So, but you're the same as it relates to legislative reform, and so we want to talk more about not only this act, but are you aware of anything that's going on in Texas or some other states? So can you share maybe some states we're unfamiliar with?
I just wanted to make an observation before I get into this, and you touched on it a little bit, but it's important to understand that historically, the African-American community didn't need to adopt. They took care of their own. And so all the informal adoption that you've talked about was very common. And so that was a good thing. But the bad thing was that the adoption system that we see in this country today was really built by white people for white people.
Amen.
And until the explosion of the foster care population in the 1980s, when we really started to see a big influx of kids of all kinds of minorities into the system, which then flooded the system, and the system really never caught up to it. We're now dealing with a situation where people want to put band-aids on things. So instead of trying to recruit families of color back in those days, they passed the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act to encourage transracial adoption. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but at the same time, it sort of missed the point. Today, I think we have a couple of things that we need to consider just to touch on the home study piece. I think we have to consider that we have a serious workforce development problem here in this way, that we have not enough caseworkers. A lot of the caseworkers that are working in the system aren't actually social workers. They might be geography majors. And at that point, they also walk into the home study process with no training of any kind. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking to focus on the training piece. But the good news is, from a legislative perspective, we've looked around and seen what different states have done. Ironically, Texas has some really interesting things going on. We have some other states that are trying really hard. But now Congress, I think, is going to go back into the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which is one of the laws that the judge referenced that created some of the barriers that he mentioned, the criminal background check piece being one of them. And we're going to look at what we've learned from that in 20 years, look at what worked and what didn't work. And I think we're going to talk about amending it. I think we're also going to talk about amending the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act and really make an investment in some of the things we're talking about. But, as I said in the chat, when I look at a family like the Smiths, who we need, there are 125,000 kids legally free for adoption in the system right now, and probably 70,000 of them are African American or minorities of some kind. We need about 70,000 Smith families right now.
Right.
So to put them in a position where they were judged on the basis of probably a lot of personal bias and perhaps a lack of training on the part of this person doing the screening, well, that's just ridiculous. And so these are the kinds of things that we really have to pay attention to. The other thing I just wanted to mention on background is that it seems pretty clear that about 25% of adoptions fail. And there's a high correlation between the age of the child at the time of the adoption and failure. So the older the child, the more likely it is to fail. That says to me, not that the child has some problem, but that the screening and matching process in the first place was really not adequate.
That's golden.
So we really have to look at all of this together in order to come up with some really sustainable solutions.
Yeah. And so what can our individual viewers do to sort of help, sort of move the needle as it relates to legislation or just, sort of not advocating, not mandating, but certainly taking our Department of Child Services in various states to task with their training, with their not addressing overloads for caseworkers. What can our individual viewers do?
Well, and Congress passed a couple of years ago called the Families First Act. I think we have to think hard about keeping kids from entering the system in the first place.
There you go.
Okay. So if you look at a universe of 400,000 kids, actually closer to 500,000 today in the system, I'll bet you a third of those kids never really belonged there, but they were removed because of a bias.
There we go.
Removed because of a workforce development issue. So there just weren't enough workers. So they just grabbed that kid just in case. And of course, this morning I testified on Beacon Hill here in Boston about having accountability for the system when kids die in the custody of the system. So we really have a system here that's a little out of balance, or a lot out of balance in some instances. But at the end of the day, we can break this down into a handful of probably really solvable problems, but we have to look at them in a systematic way. I say sometimes, Natalie, that I don't necessarily see some of these problems as social work problems or even cultural problems. I see them as business management problems. Poorly run systems, poorly staffed systems, workforce that isn't adequately trained, not enough transparency. All of these things go to the detriment of the kids. And here's my bottom line.
Yeah.
When we looked at the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which was passed in 1997 by Congress, we wanted to get kids out of the system. And we were looking specifically at kids who were legally free for adoption. So we doubled the number of adoptions from foster care in 3 years after that bill passed, and those numbers stayed about the same. However, while people were busy doing victory laps, I'm looking and seeing we've still got 100,000 kids in the system legally free. They're never going back home.
Wow.
And we have another 22,000 kids who age out of the system every year. And trust me when I tell you, and I know you guys know, we are looking at homelessness, mental illness, incarceration. Most of those kids will never graduate from high school. 5% of them go to college. So, I always say we need to treat these kids like they're our own kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're pretty far away from that right now. But to the extent that today's topic is really, in my opinion, core to the success of the system. We really have to get it right.
We do. And so what about audits? I mean, may that be a way to help get it right? You know, oftentimes people rise up to the level in which they're being watched, you know, so is that something we can implement in this nationwide system?
No, I think so. I think we're looking right now at ways to create some frameworks and benchmarks, some things that the system can do from a federal level. Because here's one of the interesting things about child welfare. Because it is so heavily federally funded and has been for quite some time, the federal government can dictate some of the rules that they have to follow. And even though I think we have to be sensitive to local cultures, you know, different communities have different levels of cultural disparity, different kinds of disproportionality, but at the same time, we can have a situation where everybody has to have a certain amount of training, where everybody has to. One of the things you asked a question earlier about reporting, and one of the things the system doesn't like to do is answer questions.
Yeah.
And so we really need to say, okay, well, you know, well, how are you really doing with 16-year-old African-American boys in the system? You know, I'd love to talk to Judge Gaither about this offline, but a couple of years ago, one of the administrators at Health and Human Services wanted to take the national adoption system offline because he, as a Latino man, was extremely concerned about what he perceived as racist profiles of the children. And I went into the site and I was like, I mean, I knew that they weren't good, but I was horrified. You know,
wow.
Like, little Johnny is 16 years old and, you know, you should adopt him. His hobby is robbing 7-Elevens. You know, I mean,
there you go.
Bad, you know,
repulsive.
You know,
and then we wonder.
Kids to begin with.
Oh.
So now we've got this sort of double burden. But I think that, you know.
And I was going to say, Maureen, we've reinforced, right, a stereotype. Whether it's reinforced subconsciously or consciously, it's reinforced, right? And so it begs the question, and that's why we just get deeper and deeper into this. And go ahead.
And you know, people hate it when I bring this up, but you know, when you look at the framework around intercountry adoption, and you have, you know, families from all over America going to Africa, going to China, going around the world to find kids, because they are worried that those kids in foster care, who, by the way, are adopted for free as opposed to $40,000, that those kids are, you know, they're broken, they're bad kids. But what they're not looking at is that every child everywhere that's out of the care of their families are foster kids.
That's right.
Are foster kids.
That's good.
At least we have medical records. We have some kind of sense of direction of what the issues were. And, you know, to the judge's earlier comment, you know, we really have to assume that, you know, this isn't 1955. You know, we're not doing 100,000 adoptions of white babies, brand new babies every day. You got to assume that almost every child that's in the adoption system, whether it's private or public or international, has experienced some trauma.
Yes.
And so, you know, to the point of the Smith's orientation, we have to be much more proactive about training and preparing families, because in my experience, and I'm looking for a family right now for an African-American young man in New Jersey who's 28 years old. He's got cerebral palsy, and he is desperate to be adopted as an adult. So the kid, and that's the other big lie, by the way, the kids don't want to be adopted. That's baloney.
Who doesn't want a permanent home? I mean, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't?
And someone should love them.
And someone should love them.
You know, so Congress is going to do some interesting things under the leadership of the most wonderful Congresswoman Karen Bass from California. Chair of the Foster Care Caucus. She's an African-American social worker from LA. She has lived this. And so now I think we have an opportunity to make it work. But you know what? We are the change.
That's it.
Okay?
That's it.
You know, governments can pass laws. You can have state law, you can have federal law, but if people don't make it work, it's not going to change anything.
That's it.
So
that's it. Yeah, drop that mic. Drop that mic. Well, having said that, with that mic drop, we're going to go ahead and take a break and have our last commercial. Thank you, Maureen.
Perfect. Thank you.
About disproportionality. I know. Just what is it?
Yeah, well, disproportionality is the term used to describe when there are basically too many children and families of color in the system with respect to the overall population upon which we serve.
Is it a problem?
It is a huge problem. It's not, but it's not just a problem in child welfare. It's a problem in juvenile justice. It's a problem in the larger society, in housing and employment,
and there's
in
data
education.
to back it up.
There's empirical data to back all of this up.
The child is not reading at the third grade, if they're not reading at a third grade level, especially for Black boys, then they're likely to be in prison. Like that, all that stuff means something. And so, it got real serious for a minute. We're like, yo, they're cute at 7 or 8, but in a minute he'll be 17, and then he's a threat to you. Now I take offense because I am also a Black male who has been told, that I am a threat. Yeah, no, on our watch, we're like, no, there's no way we allow you to set him up right now, sugarcoating it as if you have his best interest at heart, just to put him in jail later. The devil is alive. We just couldn't do it. Age of, I believe it was 7, a Black boy is highly unlikely to get adopted. Advocating specifically to couples and people of color to look to adopt and go in and grab some of our babies who are in the system who nobody seems to want.
Well, we are back. We are back. Thank you very, very much. So I'm Natalie Chavis Fisher. I'm with E360 TV, and I had the opportunity to create this phenomenal sort of unconscious bias and disproportionality in foster care talk. And I mean, all of our guests, I'm getting texts from people. And so, by the way, for our executive producer, some of our, we've got some background noise somewhere, not sure where. All righty. We'll get back to them. That's technical issues in this Zoom world, in this post-COVID world. We know how to work through all this technical stuff. So having said that, so to our executive producer, Lauren Michaels Harris, thank you. And also I've got some text that some people are trying to make comments in the chat room, and for some reason they're unable. So I don't know if there's something to sort of disable, but certainly we're going to go to your questions here now. But I want to reintroduce my guests. Of course, Micah and Jamal Smith are a foster adoptive family who are advocates for African-American children of color. They're advocates for things that are right. They take their time, talent, treasures, and everything that they have, energy, pour into the life of children who are their own and who are not their own. They're to be highly commended. Judge Geoffrey Gaither is a judge. He's been a judge since about 1995, a judge or a magistrate in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Marion County Superior Court System. So welcome back, Judge Gaither. And of course, Maureen Flately, who we just talked to before the break, who is a phenomenal. You can just feel the fierceness. You can feel the fire inside. She is not the one to be messed with, okay?
That's right.
Okay, she's got a good brain on top of her shoulders to help advocate. And so we welcome all of you back. So let's just dive in. This is our last segment. This has gone by so quickly, but let's just sort of dive in to kind of what we're talking about. So I'm going to talk to you, Judge Gaither, first. Yeah, let me ask you, you've had the opportunity to hear everything that all of our guests have talked about. What has stood out to you the most?
Wow, I'm engaged and excited about what Ms. Flately has talked about, and I'm just so empowered and excited about her grasp of the issue and how forward thinking she is. I'm also encouraged about the Smiths and their experiences. I was low key trying to encourage him to write a book, to do more than just be a guest. Now let me. Now we're all going to act like they're not sitting in the back seat of the car.
I mean,
I'm not going to mention that. Not mentioning that. I'm not mentioning that.
That's because they were taking care of them children today. That's what that is.
Whatever. But their experiences are so educational and so powerful. And there are many things about the child welfare system that need to be exposed. Their experiences on unsuccessfully trying to adopt their child. I mean, that's a decision that needs exposure. Like, now, wait a minute, we need a time out. Why did that not happen? And so maybe there's some information that's not known to us, but it's not obvious. Looking through my judicial eyes, I don't see what the problem was. Perhaps there was a problem with the child, but I've had experiences with case managers that had unprofessional relationships, not unholy, but improper relationships with potential foster families, and sometimes they will place their fingers on the scale. They'll use certain words in the reports, and the reports will reflect their implicit bias. I mean, a typical one is typically describing, especially Black women, as angry. The angry Black woman. And I used to say, well, if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you. I mean, because if you come to my house and take my babies and I'm chill about it, then that's kind of a problem.
Yeah,
right. So I'm just struck, though, to answer your question directly about the breadth of this situation. And I think together we really make a powerful team. We're the Mission Possible team. Or
That's it. Mission Possible.
We need a theme song or something like that.
We need some walk-up music up in here. Micah raised her finger, and then Maureen raised her finger. So let's go to Micah, and then let's go to Maureen.
So I kind of lost my train of thought because I was taken so into what Judge Gaither was talking about. But one thing that you did mention, we have countless experiences with different types of caseworkers. I mean, we've had some excellent ones, and we've also had some where the kids were in the system and TPR, their parental rights have been terminated for over a year. So they should have been adopted out of the system. So when you were talking about how our kids stay in the system longer, it brought me to our personal situation where the kids have been there and been ready to adopt prior to us coming, but thank God they weren't, because they're ours. But at the same time, the backstory of that caseworker not doing her job or due diligence, whether it be overworked or whether it be she didn't understand, or whether it be because she had an inappropriate relationship with the families involved and just did not really put them as a priority when it came to getting them out of the system. But different things like that just really continue to tug on our heartstrings. We had other situations with education. So it's not just about the race situation.
Yeah, that was
it's about education. So once we did get through the system, we were selected. We definitely noticed that our children had a disproportionate experience with how they were educated because they were in the system. They were attending failing schools from day one, yet they were on high honor roll. But they couldn't count money and go into the third grade. And so you're looking at that where that's just an aside of, we're talking about race and all that, but you're talking about that plays itself into the education of the foster child when they're being placed. It plays on their mental, stability when they're having to now re-enter society as a normal child because they're with a new family. They've got all these layers to contend with simply because they were children in the system that were not being taken care of by the system.
That's good. That's good, Micah. And before I go to Maureen, I just want to say, I remember the Smiths. I happen to have represented them, full disclosure, but I remember them fighting 1,000% on behalf of their foster children and their education and college funds, you name it. And you guys are to be highly, highly, highly commended.
So they weren't in my court, right?
No.
No,
did I perform? Did I perform? No, they weren't. They weren't.
Yeah, you always perform. Let me just say that.
Don't tell them that.
Oh my God, you come from a long line of performers, but that's another story.
That's another story. Yeah. Maureen, let's go ahead. Jamal, go ahead, and then we'll go to Maureen.
I was just gonna say, bring that full circle because it goes back to some of the conversation earlier we talked about, and I really believe that the ability so cultural advocacy is important. Like it's something as small as aesthetic as how to do hair, right? Mm-hmm. And that may sound surface, but that's important. To something as large as education and where the child goes to school is extremely important, or how the teacher in the school deals with your young Black boy. And you kind of alluded to, I was the head of the Civil Rights Commission for the state at the time, and I just so happened, by nature of what I'm doing, I'm dealing with tons of disproportionate data and things that are coming through. And at the time, what was heavy was the disproportionate number of Black boys who were being suspended and expelled, not just in public schools, but private schools and charter schools alike. and they were being expelled for some of the most ambiguous things ever, right? Until someone comes in to advocate for them. So if you remove that sense of advocacy away from, and they would use code words, we would go in and talk to the teachers, and they're using code words about, they're aggressive, or he doesn't know how to handle his emotion, or he can't sit still, and all of these, and I'm going, someone to come in and culturally understand how to advocate for your child is and kind of going back to when we got denied. Look, I'm a competitor at heart, and I know that you win some and you lose some. So I was not caught up on the fact that we lost, that we didn't win. I'll put it that way. But really curious as to why, because I also say as a competitor, I feel like we rank, if we're ranking potential families to be adopted, I feel like we're about as good as they come, right? And so if you got one better, great, all the better for the child. But based off of what we saw, we're not really sure that was the case. And then it got down to, well, where is this child now, and who's advocating for them as a young Black boy? Because eventually he's driving. He will be pulled over. He will be entering school. Someone needs to advocate for him. And if you're not equipped to do that, it doesn't make you a bad person. It just doesn't make that situation for the child the best that it could or should be.
That's good, Jamal. And then Maureen, I think you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, and actually, I started getting ready to comment on something the judge said, but now I have a comment around the Smiths as well.
Do both.
So the judge said something about workers having inappropriate or preferential relationships with certain foster parents. Let me tell you, I've been doing this work for 25, almost 30 years. I'm a daughter of an FBI agent, so I know how to ask questions. There's one pattern that I see everywhere I go, and that is that this system does not like people who complain. And this system does definitely not like people who work for like a civil rights commission, who are holding people accountable for a living. So if I look at the depth and breadth, and I work all over the country, I've worked all over the world, but at the end of the day, and I lived in Washington, D.C. for the first, 55 years of my life. I was right down the street when you were in law school, Judge. And, I see one thing over and over and over again. And it is that the system does not want to hear from you. They want you to take the kid and leave them alone. And I say, I would be willing to bet that if I went back and just looked at my DC cases, I was a foster parent in DC. They wanted to give me kids because I was the white lady with the big house. And, even though I'm kind of a professional complainer, I still was kind of on their side. Anyway, long story short, I'll bet there is a strong correlation between level of education, no matter what the race of the parents, with better educated, more affluent families, kind of taking a back seat to those families that are somewhat dependent on the system. And so when I think about what's wrong with the system, I think that is the number one thing that concerns me systematically, is that this is a system that is not very transparent. I mean, one thing, and this is what my testimony was about this morning, we need independent foster care review, not system, not administrative, not court driven. We need independent foster care review in every single state. If they think that police departments need to be held accountable, and I happen to agree with that, we've got kids in foster care dying because they're in chokeholds. Okay. So we need to get serious about having people in the system that have a voice. And, and here's the really crazy thing about it. When you look at the cost to systems driving away family-based care, driving away families like the Smiths, I don't know what the actual number is these days, but let's say the average cost per day to keep a kid in foster care and family-based care is $100 a day, something like that. In some jurisdictions, if you're pushing kids, especially older adolescents, into group homes, that could be costing you $500, $600, $700 a day. But the weird thing is, the more money you spend, the worse the outcomes are for the kids, because we know congregate care is not good for kids.
That's it.
So this is where I think you guys end up, Micah and Jamal. I think you were just too smart.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I agree.
You know what's funny? So after going through that first one, and as we were going through the second process, and Natalie can contest this, because I didn't convey that I was appointed by the governor and I was the head of the Civil Rights Commission, right? And it wasn't until we were dealing with, we'll call it a difficult caseworker, the second time around, Micah comes home and she goes, "Fix it." Like I'm done. Fix it. And so I go, because honestly, the head of DCS, she's a colleague of mine. So we're in staff meetings together. So it was nothing for me, but I wanted us to go through the process. I didn't want to shortchange it. I wanted to go through the process in the beginning, but it did eventually end up me having a sit down with my colleague and coworker at the time and saying, hey, Judge, here is the issue that we're dealing with. And I was never worried about us, especially adopting in the state of Indiana because of my position. Eventually I figured it was going to work itself out. But when I made the call, I'm going, my concern is not about me. As we were sitting down having that meeting, I said, it's not my, because we're going to be okay. We're going to get us adopted. We're going to get our kids and we'll be fine. I don't worry about the guy who drives a bus, right. Or he or she's maybe a school teacher, and he or she is still trying to do this thing. They don't have the governor's cell phone number or the head of DCS on speed dial. They can't make that call. So the fact that I have to make this call to straighten this out,
it's a problem.
It's a problem, right? Now, after I made the call and we had that conversation, right? Everything changed. Like when I say everything changed, it just started moving quick. And I go, it shouldn't be that way. Like I shouldn't have to make.
Well, I got
Jamal,
a quick. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jamal.
That's because that goes to what Maureen was saying, right? That they don't like to be complained to. The system doesn't like. All of a sudden, there's a response.
They don't want questions.
They don't want a question. But go ahead, Maureen.
But Natalie, the Smiths just exposed their privilege.
They use their privilege.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point of having juice if you're not going to use it?
In the right way.
Props to you for doing that, but it was necessary and successful. And let me just say this, on our youth justice side, we are creating family life coaches and family navigators. And so what we do, we are encouraging families that have had experiences with our youth justice system to be eligible to expose themselves to help other families go through the process. I would urge the Smiths to do the exact same thing. There are lots of families that are trying to find their way through the system, and they have lawyers, but we speak a whole different language, and sometimes families and people leave court and they don't even know what happened. They always have to ask, what happened? Right. And sometimes the lawyers are successfully able to explain, and sometimes not so much. But that's what I love about the Smiths so much. I mean, the real people who use real language and 2-syllable words. I mean, everybody can understand exactly what they're trying to say.
Right, they're not talking.
I would encourage you guys to take your advocacy to the new level, to another level, and create opportunities where other families can benefit from your experiences, so they won't expend as much emotional costs as they have.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit different. It could deal with disproportionality and cultural biases or not, but we've had the question come up several times in the chat room. What about religious differences? And I think I'll turn this over to Maureen. So is there, what have you seen as it relates to religious differences and foster parents being evaluated in children?
Where to begin? Okay, so I've been a bit of a student of impact litigation on child welfare systems. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm fascinated by the effort to change the system through lawsuits. And I've come to the conclusion, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm actually not much of a fan of class action suits because typically lawyers get paid win or lose. The kids don't necessarily get anything out of it. But individual claims on individual victims, you betcha. So one of the first big lawsuits against the city of New York was in the 1960s. And at the time, it was quite common for child welfare agencies to discriminate against the kids in an unusual way. And that is that if you weren't of that religion, so you weren't Catholic or Baptist or Jewish or whatever it was, you couldn't go to a resource or a home or an orphanage in this case that was a different religion. And so it created this amazing, horrible backup of kids who weren't being served at all. Obviously, gradually over time, that changed. And keep in mind that this is the system, the child welfare system's been heavily privatized since the early 1800s. And it's really been a faith-based system since that time because early on, those were the only people doing work for kids. Child welfare system, as we know it in America, started to be created in the 1850s, was insanely racist. We come up to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The war on poverty changed that a little bit. But anyway, my point is this. I see kids all the time that want to stay in touch with their religion. So they're Catholic, they're Muslim, they're whatever they are. But they're put into foster families who have different faiths and who are in some ways dictating to the kids about what kind of faith they have to observe, even if there's not a finalized adoption. Then you have, the obvious issues of other kinds of faith-based bias. So you have kids who are LGBTQ or whatever.
That's right.
And they're put into faith-based programs that basically,
say you're bad.
Pray the gay away.
Yeah.
So it's funny because the issue of religion is actually quite serious. And of course, being Catholic myself, I'm appalled by the Catholic Church's track record around child abuse. And we are not on the moral high ground in that regard. But yet, weirdly, Catholic Charities is kind of leading the charge to allow faith-based programs to engage in systematic bias.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, if we wanted to, this is a whole other issue to unpack, but it needs to be unpacked.
It does. That's another critical conversation that needs to happen. It just is. So let's just talk about, Maureen, you talked about let's give a number, like maybe $100 even more that it takes a day to take care of a child in the welfare system. We've talked about disproportionality and how, and there's research that shows, and Judge Gaither, you probably read the research, and Jamal, you too, that African-American children, Hispanic-American children, Native American children stay in the system like sometimes 2 times as long and often don't get adopted. Right. So that's costing more. So that's why it's beneficial to systems.
Worse than that.
Say it again.
Worse than that, Natalie, because when you look at the pipeline, I mean, I consider the child welfare system in this country to be a direct pipeline to the prison system. So you look at all these kids who are being, from the day they enter the system, educationally neglected, medically neglected, their mental health is neglected, their spiritual health is neglected. The older and older and older they get in the system, the more and more likely they are to engage in other systems. So let's say
the penal system.
An American boy who's 12 years old. Let's say you've been in the system since you were 5 or 6. You're getting more and more traumatized. When you get to be 13, well, you're just not so cute anymore. So you know what? We're going to put you at Boys Town or whatever group home is there. You put the kid in that system, and suddenly the risk of being engaged in the juvenile justice system starts to show its ugly head. And so whether that child is wants to be engaged in juvenile justice issues, but maybe he gets into a fight in the group home. Maybe someone steals something from him and he fights back. It's not really a criminal thing, but it's an easy way for the child welfare system to offload them into another system. The expense just spirals. But here's the real cost. You let those 22,000 kids age out of the system every year without a family and no one and nobody.
Yeah.
Guess what? Half of them end up in homeless shelters.
That's it.
75% of them end up in the criminal justice system somehow. Their suicide rates are off the chain. And then you look at the lack of education, the lack of jobs. It is a hot mess. And so if you think they're expensive when they're little kids, it just gets way more expensive to do it wrong.
So let's do this. So we have built the case. The system is broken. It absolutely is broken. In these last 5 minutes, I want to do sort of a round robin and go around the room. And I want you guys to just think of one thing an individual can do to help chisel away at this sort of foundational building that just keeps growing and growing of disproportionality and unconscious bias. So I think we'll start on my screen. So it'd be Micah, Jamal, Maureen, and then we're going to end with Geoffrey. And so we just have 5 minutes. So Micah, why don't we start with you?
The one thing that I would encourage families to do that are interested, because I think the system's so large and cumbersome, and a lot of people get nervous and scared to even go down that path. I would say get educated about what it is that you're trying to do, because where there's a heartstring being tugged, there's also on the other side of that education. You can't just do it out of the love for the child or out of just the want to help someone, because that wanes very quickly. So be educated first and foremost, and connect yourself with a family or someone that has done it that's on the outside before you jump into it. So education would probably be one of my tips.
That's good, Micah. That's good. Thank you. Jamal?
She's way better than I am. Narrowing that down. That's why
she's your wife.
That's not absolutely right. Yeah,
I try to be the calming factor.
It is hard to pinpoint one thing. If we're talking about that one thing for for folks who are interested.
Yeah.
Like Nike, I would say just do it, man, and really jump in. We got one of the reasons we got in, not only that disproportionate, when you drill down a little bit more, even about Black boys in particular, that gap grows even more. And so we saw a young Black boy, and we didn't want a newborn. We wanted the ones that nobody came to get. So, so just doing it. And when we entered that space, we didn't know everything, right? To her point, and she was the scholar in that. Micah,
that's the journalist in me. I keep digging.
But we had to jump in for it. We had to do it. We had to, it was a conviction, and we wanted to go understanding that we didn't know. We just knew what we wanted to see happen, and we wanted to be a part of that change. And in order to get to the finish line, you got to start.
That's it.
So I'd say just do it.
That's it. That's an athlete. That's the athlete in you, Jamal. Thank you.
I love it.
I love it too. Maureen, you're next.
So not everybody can foster adopt. Not everybody has the equipment to do it or the space to do it. But there is one thing that every single American taxpayer can do. And keep in mind, this is a system that is supported by billions of dollars of tax money, billions of federal dollars, billions of state dollars. Every person can pick up the phone and call their member of Congress and say, right now, today, you need to start holding the child welfare system accountable for its failures. We need to have a zero tolerance policy for any American child aging out of this system without anybody. Every single child deserves a person. So whether you want to do it yourself or not, you can put pressure on the people who control the agenda. And that's what I want to do.
Yes,
that's
amen.
Good.
That's good. Jeffrey or Judge Gaither?
That's okay. I'm going to say this, and this is to everybody. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. You don't need to recreate the wheel. Help is available. You don't have to do all these. There are local mentoring groups called New Boy, which is an acronym for New Breed of Youth, and Inner Beauty. They do fantastic work with our youth, acting as mentors in the youth justice system and the child welfare system. It doesn't take a whole lot. It takes energy. It takes time. Sometimes you can write a check, but if you can't do that, your mere presence as a human being, as an adult human being, can be a role model that could benefit children and families in the system. It doesn't take a great deal of whatever. Everybody's been gifted in some way with some talent. Use that talent, help other people, be a role model, be the village elder to the children that are in need of services.
Very good, very good. So I want to thank all of my guests for being here, and I just want to leave with these parting words. There are nearly 500,000 children in the foster care system currently. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans are represented disproportionately in that same system. We talk about that, right? We've talked about how this happens, why this happens, sort of what this looks like. Some of the things that we don't talk about is that little Black boy who is in the system and is told through action and through words that he will never have a forever home. Or that 15-year-old child who had a child and was removed from the home, both she and the child, but in that home, she had a grandmother and a great-grandmother, but because that family construct did not look like the norm, she and her child were removed from that home. Or the Hispanic teenager who was told they are a threat by the system, who often threatens their own healthy stability. Or the Native American child who wonders if the powers that be have thought about me. Let's think about those people as we bring ourselves to a call of action. It's important and incumbent upon each one of us to look inside ourselves, look at our own brokenness, look at our own biases, fix those, and help those around us do the same. Broken systems and broken adults break children. Let's stop the cycle. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.